As critics blast the president's increased reliance on executive orders, one political analyst says, get used to it. Essentially, we may be witnessing, he says, a fundamental transformation of presidential power. The Wall Street Journal's Jerry SEIB explains his thinking on that.
Well, with more politics now, as Republicans on Capitol Hill push back against the president's use of executive powers, the Wall Street Journal's Jerry SEIB tackled this issue in his Capitol Journal column this week, writing, quote, much has been made of the problems President Barack Obama has had getting things done via the traditional method of working with Congress to enact laws and launch programs, and of his resolve this year to work around Congress. It's commonly assumed that this represents a temporary state of affairs. SEIB goes on to write, but perhaps this is the new normal, not a temporary aberration. Perhaps what we think of as presidential power is changing in fundamental and lasting ways. Jerry SEIB is executive Washington editor of the Wall Street Journal and joins us now. So it's a very interesting column, Jerry. Really enjoyed reading it. How do you think we're witnessing a change in really fundamental ways to presidential power?
Well, a lot of this is about kind of a decline in presidential power and the need for this White House and maybe successive White Houses to deal with that reality. I mean, the fact is you have political paralysis in Washington, and that stops things from happening to a large extent to the traditional way. The president proposes, Congress disposes, the president signs, money gets spent. Well, you have political paralysis, but also you have a decline of fiscal resources. There just isn't the money there to do traditional government programs that presidents like to propose, so that sort of goes by the board. And you have kind of a rise of a feeling around the country that maybe other institutions, local governments, state governments, private corporations, foundations, may be better equipped to solve some of these problems. Plus a new factor here, which is the ability of a White House to use social media to mobilize millions of people, millions of dollars also in some cases, by going around not just Congress but the traditional media channels. And so the combination of all these things suggests that maybe there's a different way for a president to have some impact than the traditional ways of just going through Congress, enacting programs, and spending a lot of taxpayer dollars.
A lot there in that bucket, so I'm going to pick out a few points. Jerry, do you think that this transition that you think we could be witnessing is specific to this administration in power at this time, or do you think this transition would be happening regardless of who occupied the White House?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I guess what I posit in the column is that these trend lines are not going to go away just when at the end of the Barack Obama administration. I think some of these things may be permanent. Certainly, the restriction of fiscal resources that the government has available is going to continue. I mean, tax revenues are not going up much. More of the federal government goes to writing checks for Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid, leaves less money for the kind of traditional programs. So you have to find other ways around the problems. Plus, again, social media creates a different way to mobilize forces. I also don't think that this election that's coming up, or maybe even the one after that, is going to end the basic political gridlock that Washington is dealing with. So you have a whole combination, a constellation of forces that seem to be pushing presidents, not just this one, future ones potentially, in this direction as well.
We're all part of this great experiment, which is America. And I don't want to oversimplify things, Jerry, but I'm curious because we often think about things in good and bad terms. Based on what you're thinking on this, do you think this is good for the country that, for example, state, local governments are empowered, maybe non-government groups are powerful? Or do you look at it as potentially bad for our country because there is less power potentially in the power of the president?
There's a bigger social force. There's kind of a decentralization of power, and the Internet is creating that in a lot of ways in American society. This may just be one. It's an interesting question, and it cuts a lot of different ways politically. I know conservatives at the moment are very upset about the use of executive powers, thinking that kind of creates an imperial presidency. But there's another side of this, which is that maybe conservatives ought to be happy about this because it suggests that maybe the White House in the future can't just turn to traditional government programs to solve problems. Maybe it needs to mobilize other forces in society, and that's always been an idea that conservatives liked, going out into civic society and using other organizations, other parts of American society to solve problems, not just the big government. So I think there's plenty in here for everybody to chew on, some things that both sides will like and dislike if this trend holds, as I suggest it might.
When we think about social media and reaching out to outside groups, outside organizations, some would suggest that the rise of the Internet and technology is a great tool for democracy. But I'm curious, Jerry, do you think that is the case, that it is a great tool for democracy, or are we seeing a bifurcation, if you will, of different classes about who has access to the technology and who can participate and who cannot?
Well, I think there is some bifurcation now, but I think that goes away over time. And one of the things you have to acknowledge about the internet is that it's messy. It kind of has coarsened political dialogue to some extent, but it is in the long run a democratizing tool. And I think that one of the things that the Obama campaign figured out was it also is a great tool for organizing and mobilizing. I think government hasn't quite figured out how to use it quite as well for its own governing purposes, but I think that will come as well. You know, for example, when the White House has an initiative in Congress, it often uses social media to encourage people to speak up, as it did, for example, when Congress was really reluctant to extend a student loan program. Created some pressure using social media. Congress went along ultimately, and that's the sort of thing that the internet can allow governors to do if they have some support.
It's an interesting example. John's favorite example, of course, is the petition to deport Justin Bieber that was up at the WhiteHouse.gov website. So different shades, if you will, Jerry, of participation, and it's interesting to see where that's going to go. Jerry, very interesting
absolutely.
column. It's always a joy to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, appreciate it.